Before I turn the floor over our speakers, let me introduce them. Elizabeth Charles, that the majority of you know, I think, is a faculty researcher at Dawson College with a PhD in educational technology and postdoctorate in the learning sciences. She's the co-director of SALTISE, that means Supportive Active Learning and Technological Innovation in Studies of Education, an initiative funded by the Entente Canada-Québec, which promotes the implementation of student-centered active learning instruction and professional development of faculty within Quebec Anglophone Network. Jérémy Choquette is a faculty member at Dawson College with a PhD in physics. He's the developer of the CourseFlow platform. Enjoy the webinar, ladies and gentlemen.
Hi everyone, bonjour tout le monde et merci au HEPC pour cette invitation pour le webinaire aujourd'hui. On continue en français, en anglais. Si vous avez des questions en français, on va essayer de répondre en français, mais peut-être c'est nécessaire de répondre en anglais, mais merci pour la compréhension. Bon, aujourd'hui, nos présentations, c'est en anglais, mais les diapos sont, peut-être on peut traduire en français aussi, si c'est plus facile pour comprendre. Bon, Jérémy, est-ce que tu avais quelque chose à dire au commencement?
Non, pas vraiment, mais allô tout le monde.
Oui, parce que c'est pas un grand nombre de personnes. On fait une présentation plus informelle pour encourager des participations de tous dans la conversation. Bon, donc, je commence. Merci au Entente Canada-Québec aussi.
Liz.
Oh, yes, of course. Thanks for reminding me. I want to thank the Entente Canada-Québec for our funding and recognize SALTISE as well, and all our colleagues. So the overview today of the presentation is going to be, we're going to talk about very briefly the tool. We'll talk about the problematic that started us thinking about the tool, the conceptual framework that is involved in this tool called CourseFlow, its history, and then the co-design and the support of the program revision, which is something I think most of you would very much want to hear. And then we will have examples of the tool as we go along. And as I said, please feel free to make this an informal type of conversation by stopping us if you have questions. So CourseFlow, what is it? So the purpose is, it's a tool to support instructional planning. It's a tool to help with the communication of information. And we do this in what we call the workflow. And it's a tool to support collaboration between educators. CourseFlow has, the structure of it is on 3 levels of instructional planning. At the smallest level, it is the lesson or the activity planning. In the middle is the course or the curriculum planning capabilities. And at the highest level, it's programs, being able to organize and structure programs. These 3 are interrelated and can be, and they're nested In other words, you can move from one to the next. And this is one of the things we believe is very unique about CourseFlow. CourseFlow funding comes from the work that we've been doing with SALTISE, funded through the Entente Canada-Quebec. It is a free tool, so you don't have to belong to SALTISE to access it, but you do need to sign up through My Daylight, which is the platform. CourseFlow features, the three that we'd like to highlight are its relational database that is focused on learning outcomes and more specifically competencies, learning objectives. And it allows us to track these throughout the course or the program levels. It also, we will feature the multiple ways to visualize these data, which is something that Jeremy will focus on. And then there are multiple ways to organize these data. Again, that is something that Jeremy will focus on in that part of the presentation. So what was the problem? Why did we even start building this tool? So evidence tells us that active learning, for instance, is effective. It is effective in helping to close achievement gaps. It is effective in, sorry, just need to get back to my, it's effective in decreasing failure rates. Educational policymakers also tell us that things like assessment, student assessment, instructional design, classroom management, data, all of these things are important. They also tell us that competencies, learning outcomes, learning objectives are things that all educators in the college level need to understand and work on when they do their courses, but more importantly, when they're looking at program either development or program revision, which many of you are involved in right now. And program approach. Program approach has been a challenge since the 1990s, and it rests on understanding competencies, learning outcomes, learning objectives. So with those as a foundation, what do teachers need to do? Teachers need to be good at understanding how do you get learning outcomes? Well, it's part of this process of developing some sense of what is the, the measurable achievements and setting goals for assessment and those kinds of objectives that have to be operationalized from your competencies. Teachers are asked to use things like Bloom's taxonomy that tells them that it's not just learning facts, it's being able to apply those facts, it's even being able to synthesize and compare those facts and create new objects, new knowledge from the facts that they learn. And teachers are told that they should be implementing evidence-based pedagogies, like the one active learning that we talked about. At the same time, pedagogical counselors need to communicate some of these things that are, how do you do backward design? What is a learning outcome? How is it different from a learning objective? And they need to convince, teachers, faculty, that some of these things, like backward design, for instance, is an important way to work. And it's useful because it allows you to evaluate your students in a fair and equitable way. And both pedagogical counselors and faculty need to design instruction and collaborate. And that's one of the things that we recognize strongly, the design and the collaboration. That's where CourseFlow came into being. So our conceptual framework. Our conceptual framework for CourseFlow is grounded in design approaches. And one of the biggest challenges we have is what we consider the research practice gap. How does a researcher like myself, who's studying pedagogy and learning, how do we work with practitioners or the practice? How do we give that information in a way that is not a transfer of knowledge as researchers tell practitioners what we've learned? What we're proposing is a co-design approach where we both work together and we co-construct knowledge in such a way that we are sharing and not transmitting information, but we are building together. So research and practice coming together, but how does that happen? So our approach, our framework is one in which researchers bring knowledge of the mechanisms and the methodological tools that we know about from research, and those allow us to tell what can happen and how do we track it. Practitioners, on the other hand, bring a very important knowledge of implementation and the tools that they have built in order to make the research findings implementable. So together, what we're proposing, and this is not just we are proposing it, but this is a research approach called research practice partnership, in which the researcher and the practitioner are equal partners, each presenting and informing each other with the knowledge that they have built about their particular, from their particular perspective, and bringing together the resources or the tools that they have each developed. In this way, what we are saying is we have a model that allows us to, and has allowed us to build a CourseFlow. So this is now the history of CourseFlow. So we started CourseFlow, we're calling it 1.0, at the activity level. And that activity level was designed around active learning instruction. And active learning instruction is student-centered, it's a student-centered approach. It's an activity-centered approach, and the activity is often on higher order thinking. There's a diversity of instructional modalities in active learning instruction. Orchestration of the instruction is a critical component, and it's all evidence-based pedagogy. So if we keep those things in mind, when we started developing, we started with a group that we called our research practice partnership group. So a working group, and you'll recognize Jeremy with short hair there from a few years back. And this is the kind of work we did, sitting around tables, looking at workflows, trying them out, figuring out what exactly needs to be communicated. And because active learning is activity focused, this is what we're focusing on, is what is the activity that a teacher is trying to do, and what is the activity that the student is going to be doing once the teacher is doing what, once the teacher has set up an activity for students, what does the teacher do while the students are engaged in that activity? That is what is called orchestration. And that comes from research, and a researcher and colleagues call, it's Pierre Dillenberg and his colleagues. That is what we're working from, this notion of scripts and orchestration. That is our theoretical framework. So with that, we're trying to develop a visual language to communicate to teachers what exactly was the task that they had intended to do, what exactly are their students trying to do, and what are we trying to set up in terms of the orchestration of this work. So CourseFlow has started off with this intentional, we are trying to communicate we're trying to communicate in a succinct way, so a visual way, and we're trying to keep it in such a way that teachers would be able to understand how they're engaging their students when they design an activity. What level are they engaging their students on? Remember, I mentioned that Bloom's taxonomy was a very important component here. Is, are they engaging their students in different kinds of tasks, in different levels of thinking, and in different groupings? So individual, group, whole class. Those were the things we were trying to consider. And those are the icons that are inside the legend that we have here. And the columns were very purposefully designed to suggest where these things were happening outside of class. So before, many of you know about flipped classroom. So a lot of the teaching and a lot of the learning starts outside of the classroom, then comes into the classroom. And we wanted to be able to show that to our colleagues and document it. So this kind of documentation, this kind of visual language was a very important one for us. And that's where CourseFlow began. So the workflows are coherent sequences of instructional tasks associated with learning objectives and outcomes. And it's the right level of abstraction that you can make sense, but it's not so detailed that you're giving someone all of your course material. So keep those things in mind, because those levels are really important to us, that we're always thinking about when we were designing for CourseFlow. So here's a place that Jeremy can show you what did it look like. So I'm going to stop sharing and let Jeremy take over. And I see that there are a couple of things in the chat, so I'll read those while he's doing this.
There we go. So yeah, I'm just going to quickly show you what our current version of the activity level of CourseFlow looks like. And I want to stress that this is now, and Liz hasn't gotten quite into this yet, but this is now an online platform. Anyone can use it. And you can use this to plan an activity. And we've designed this based around the idea that it should be as simple and as fast to use as possible, as intuitive as it can be. So everything is based on a very simple drag and drop system where we've got our different places that the learning can take place, either out of class by the instructor, by the students, and then in class by the instructor and students. And to add these nodes, these tasks, everything is just drag and drop. And we can quickly take that and edit it. We can add actually a bunch of these, so we can have our students do something out of class, and then our instructor does something in class, maybe sets up the activity, and then the students are going to do something. And we can quickly click on those, give them a title, a more obvious description, and we can add those icons that Liz was showing to show the kind of task. Maybe they're going to discuss something here. I'll zoom in so you can see that a little better. Maybe you want a discussion. Actually, this is the teacher stuff, so we should focus on the students. Maybe the students are going to have a discussion, and they're going to have a whole class discussion or a group discussion. And you can quickly create something like this, and the end result would look something like this, where this is actually one of our pre-built activities, a basic jigsaw activity. The instructor starts by dividing students into groups, assigns a portion of the assignment. Students are going to research material. They're going to divide up into expert groups, present their findings to the original group, and then complete the assignment. And then the instructor will evaluate it. And at each of these steps, we can expand these out to get a little bit more information about what the students or the instructor are doing at this point. Everything is built to be very quick to, very quick to change And we can, so everything is just drag and drop. We can move stuff around, we can change orders. And again, this is supposed to be very, very adaptable. You could even adapt it kind of on the fly if you wanted. I'm going to turn that back to Liz now.
Thanks, Jeremy. Again, if anybody has questions as we go, feel free to just jump in, and we'd be happy to explain anything that wasn't obvious. So going back to the presentation, CourseFlow 2.0 was the course level, or is the course level of CourseFlow. So what happened along the way, so I'm still talking about the history of CourseFlow development. What happened along the way is that people like Jeremy and myself, because we were using CourseFlow for ourselves and we were experimenting with it ourselves for our courses, we started thinking, well, if we could map out an activity, what if we were to map out several activities? In fact, what if we were to map out our entire course, the entire semester? And that particular question that we asked was the genesis of Jeremy building the next level, the course level. Why is this important? Well, course level was important to people who do active learning because if you do any kind of student-centered approaches that involve projects and the kind of activities that run across several lessons, you quickly realize that you want to be able to see what those look like. So the course level allows you to design a coherent active learning curriculum. It allows you to track AL, active learning activities, but other things are become very, not only intuitive, but you recognize very quickly when you're doing active learning instruction, you're creating things like artifacts. So an artifact is the project that the student is working on. If for instance, if you were teaching in social science, perhaps you're giving them a project where they're iterating, they're refining a paper, a paper that they're presenting, or a presentation that they have to give to the class. In the case of photography, my students were developing a bigger project that would be a portfolio. And those are the kinds of artifacts that are typical coming out of active learning. Another component of active learning is assessments, because assessments are not just final things, they are formative. They're critical to students understanding where they are and how they're doing, and not as a punitive grade, but as learning, as formative feedback. So those three things, the activity, the artifact, and the assessment, were components that we felt were necessary to represent at the course level of CourseFlow. And the thing that's important is as I mentioned, people like Jeremy and I, because we're the early adopters of CourseFlow, because we decided that those are the things we wanted, we also reached out to our colleagues, the practitioners, and had them start meeting, have them start talking. So we had groups like the Dawson Active Learning Community, which some of you know about. These teachers, our colleagues, would meet together, go over these kinds of conversations with each other as a group, and look and refine the tool and tell us as designers, Jeremy being the real powerhouse designer, on my side, I'm more the conceptual designer, telling us what needs to be there, what is not intuitive, what other features we need to have. And that's how the course level was built. And so here again, we're going to stop to let Jeremy show you more what a course level looks like.
Sure, and I actually just want to, I already answered it in the Q&A, but I want to tackle this question because I think it's an important one. Angela asked, so it's shared between colleagues. At what point is this shared with students? Can they consult it as well? So the answer to that is we are currently working on and will be working on over the course of certainly the next year, possibly even over the summer, creating a student view where students are able to easily access this. At the current moment, this is something that you can export through your computer's, print to PDF. And so you'd be able to print out the flow and send it to students. However, we are working on a more accessible mechanism for that, where students will be able to log into CourseFlow as well and consult everything in the course that you want them to see. I will, I'll show you the course right now. So at the course level, as Liz said, one of the things that we really noticed when building CourseFlow is that these things, these different levels, they share a lot of visual features. We can actually represent them in very similar ways. This kind of flowchart structure works at the activity level and at the course level, and we'll see later to some extent at the program level as well. Now, again, we have this simple drag and drop, plan your course week by week. We can add in a couple of weeks here, week 1, week 2, week 3. And if you don't like planning week by week, you can change these to topics instead. And then we have our 4 main default categories: preparation, lesson, artifacts, or assessments. Though many people will change these. These are customizable. Again, drag and drop, we can change their order, we can change their name, and a lot of people will change artifact to lab or something, say they don't really like to think about in terms of artifacts. Though we do recommend that people use the defaults. There's good theoretical reasons behind these. But yeah, and again, it's just drag and drop. We can add some preparation, maybe reading assignment, add in our lessons. We could add in our assessments, and we can add some ordering. Now, the ordering here is not just one thing to another, because we might need to, maybe this preparation, maybe this assessment doesn't actually, it comes after this, but it's this lesson, but it is only dependent on the preparation. So it can really change our flow here to show where the flow of information, where the flow of instruction goes. And a completed course project might look a little something like this. So this is actually a mechanics course in physics created by my colleague, Jean-François Brière. And he has planned out basically his entire mechanics course for physics in CourseFlow. And this is actually published online. Many instructors publish these freely on CourseFlow, and then you could take it and adapt it for your own use it for inspiration, read through it, or even copy it and change it around and make it your own. But yeah, he starts week 1, he's just got his course intro, but then he does some labs, some reading assignments, and all of these, he's showing the flow of how each component affects, or which components affect the others. And he's used the arrows to indicate these. And all of these have some more information telling exactly what he's going to be doing that day. And I notice he hasn't done this, but you can also link these up to activity level workflows. So you can have activity level workflows in your project, and you can create a direct link so that if I double click one of these, then it will take me to that very, very detailed step-by-step process of how to do this torque and rotational equilibrium activity. So there's this entire hierarchy that exists within CourseFlow of program, course, activity, And each one is can be nested within the other, so that you could plan out theoretically this entire thing at all scales. Back to you, Liz.
So I'm going to continue on. So here we go. One of the things that Jeremy didn't mention in describing the course level, which is critical to this next level, the program level, is when we started doing course level, we recognized, if you recall back a few minutes, I mentioned to you 3 things that were critical about doing active learning or student-centered approaches. One of them is this notion of activity, another one is artifact, and a third is assessment. What those tell us is one important thing: learning outcomes. So at the course level, what we started playing around with was, can we show how a learning outcome, so a learning outcome or a learning objective, because it's always, these are some of the terminologies that we play around with, and we mean different things. Different people mean different things by this idea, or we all mean the same thing by the different words we use. But primarily what we're saying, no matter who says it, a learning outcome or instructional objective means that we know what we want the student to get out of the lesson or the entire course, the series of lessons. And that was an important feature that we built into the course level. What we did, and Jeremy will show you many, many examples of this, is it allowed us to, when we showed people the course level, everyone kept on saying, program. I can see this being useful for our program development. That is why we developed the program level of CourseFlow, because we were able to tag the same learning objective or the learning outcome to the different nodes. And what that allows you to do is to validate, confirm that in fact, when you assess your student on something, you have actually taught them that thing and had them practice that thing with an artifact, for instance. So that's where the program level came in. So the notion of backward design is one in which it's an instructional design approach that says, tell me where you want to take the student before you even start telling me how you're going to get the student to go there. So in that case, mapping out your lesson, mapping out your course for the entire year required that you knew where you were taking your student before you even started. And CourseFlow, because we could do this articulating of the learning objectives, we could then, the way that it allows you to now account for those is this notion of tagging. And maybe, Jeremy, you can just briefly show them what tagging means.
I'll show that. I realized that JF's example was not actually using learning outcomes, so I'm going to have to talk to him about that. So I ended up having to cut them out there, but I've just quickly added some to his. So I'm going to again share my screen.
And in fact, this is a benefit because Jeremy is showing you how quickly it can be done.
Yeah,
it really is not hard.
Right. So I just quickly added to that mechanics course. I actually cloned and imported his course into my own project, and I've decided to add some course outcomes having to do with Newton's laws. So this is the workflow view that you saw. I just clicked over to edit course outcomes, and I added a couple of outcomes. I added a big outcome, students are able to apply Newton's laws, and then I added sub outcomes So these would be like your general and specific learning objectives, if you're familiar with that language. And so then I added, I just did these very quickly. They're going to use Newton's first law, Newton's second law, and Newton's third law. And then one of the really important things at the course level is going to be actually tracking. You want to make sure that you're actually hitting all of these objectives, that the students are at some point learning these things. And ideally, you'd want to make sure that you prepare them for each one, that you have a lesson on it, that you evaluate it at the very least. So you want to at least prep them, have a lesson, and have an assessment. So when we flip back to this workflow view, you can now see that my course outcomes show up here. And I can just quickly drag and drop them. So I'm going to say that these force things, so we've got, he's doing definition of forces and free body diagrams. Students are probably going to be applying probably Newton's first law. So I'm going to drag and drop that, and Newton's second law. And now you can see that there's this little tag that's shown up next to that component, next to this lab. And if I zoom in on that and hover over it, you can see, let me zoom to, there we go. You can see our two components, our two learning objectives are now tagged in. And I can go through and I can tag all of these tasks all within the course with all the various objectives that I want to use. And that's not the really fun part. The really fun part is if we go into other views and we look at the course outcome table, then we are able to track throughout our entire course, every single task, we are able to track all of our course outcomes, our course objectives, our learning, general and specific learning objectives. Again, if you're familiar with that language. And we can see exactly where they get addressed. We can see it week by week. We can check to make sure that we're addressing them in the correct order. Maybe later on over here somewhere, I'm not really paying much attention to what he's doing here, but maybe later on we address Newton's third law somewhere. And so we can see now that these two components get addressed here. This one gets addressed here. And we can see our totals week by week. And in fact, if we go all the way to the end, then we're going to see the grand total, and we can see that everything should end up by the end getting addressed. And we can sort these as well by category, so we can get just the preparation. We can make sure that at some point we're preparing them for each of these things, which clearly here we are not, because we do not have check marks in our total column. However, somewhere in our labs, we cover a couple others. Ideally, we would see the totals for all these categories be checked off everywhere. We can make sure that we're doing everything that we can to address all of these learning objectives. I notice we have new Q&As. Can we add course outcomes to evaluations? Yes, you can. It's actually just a matter of, if I go, maybe it'll be a little more obvious if I go into the workflow view. Here's his first evaluation, is quiz, equilibrium, and it's again, just drag and drop to tag, or you can do this by finding that within the table as well. I will stop sharing and turn things back over to Liz.
So Jeremy, there are a couple of questions that Quinn, for instance, asked a question about the templates, and I don't know the answer if they're still.
Oh, yes, there are templates available on CourseFlow. If you're searching, make sure that you select under allowed types, select everything that you want to be seeing, including activity, course, program, or project. If those are all deselected by default, and so you're not actually searching for any, that will be changed in an upcoming update. All right, back to you, Liz.
Okay, great. So just continuing on, as I said, that that piece that Jeremy just showed you was the light bulb going off for us, because once again, as an active learning, as someone trying to implement an active learning pedagogy, that the ability to track, to make sure that you don't get lost in the weeds. Sometimes you get so caught up in getting students to be engaged in something, you forget that you did have a learning objective because your students are doing a beautiful project. They may not be going, getting to the goal of the course. So this allows us to be accountable to ourselves as well as be accountable to the students. And that was, again, that was the light bulb going off, because if we can do it for one course, how about doing it for the entire program of courses? So CourseFlow relational database, that is what Jeremy is starting to show you. And that's a really critical piece. So the relational database facilitates tracking of the learning outcomes or competencies. And it has all of these data visualizations that Jeremy is starting to show you, which again, if you've ever done any kind of work with colleagues, being able to see the different ways that you need to see the data is very critical. So at the program level, supporting program revision process, we believe CourseFlow is able to do this because it links to the other levels, meaning the course and the activity level. Because it features focus on design and implementation of the courses, we believe it can support program revision process, but that's an open question. So we've been working very, very closely in all the development, as we showed you at the activity level and the course level. We're always working with our colleagues. And in this case, our colleagues are now people who are doing program revision. And therefore, that's one of the things that we are hoping that this kind of webinar allows us to work with more people who wanted to use it at this level. And we learn from our interactions with you. As we said, we use a research practice partnership approach to learn and co-design. So just in summary, CourseFlow supports the following: tracking competencies, creating program outcomes and goals and whatever else you have as these tangible things that you must get to. It helps in creating the course learning objectives and goals and all those other things that are tangible that you need to get to. It creates and manages courses. It is associated with competencies and outcomes for courses. It creates a complexity matrix, competency matrix. It shows vertical alignment of objectives, and it creates a framework for creating courses. So we are now at the stage where I'm going to hand it over to Jeremy to now describe the process that he's gone through in developing this part of the platform that is very sophisticated back-end development as well as front-end conceptualization.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit actually about our process of our research practice partnership here. And I have to give thanks to Monica Lopez and Kathy Roy in particular at Dawson, here at Dawson, one a ped counselor and another a teacher in the physiotherapy technology program, because this has been one heck of a process and a learning experience for me, because I came into this knowing nothing about the program revision process, and in fact, nothing about what it means to have a program. And I'm going to show you that right now, actually, because this is what I started with as my visual, kind of framework for what a program was. Because in order to have a tool that we can use in order to do program revision, we have to first have a conceptual model of what a program actually is. We have to map out its architecture. And so going into this, I started with this thought that, okay, this is what a program is. It's a program. It's made up of a couple of courses and then some competencies, and then the courses address the competencies. And any of you who are now involved in program revision are probably laughing right now at me, and because this is very obviously way too simplistic and completely wrong. So I learned very quickly, this is not true, because this is actually, and I learned through our research practice partnership, in which I developed kind of a basic CourseFlow version for the program. And I was like, here you go, this is it. And they were like, no. So I learned first off that, of course, the competencies have elements, which I knew, but the complicated part is that they're not necessarily one-to-one with courses. There's not like a one competency, one course relationship here, unless you're really lucky and you're in like the science program, then it's more or less like that. But in especially a lot of the technical programs, there are these very complicated relationships where a competency might get addressed, its different elements might get addressed in a whole bunch of different courses, and different courses might address a whole bunch of elements coming from different competencies. Second, competencies and their elements, they're not actually directly related to the courses. Different competencies look different in different courses. So they're not actually, the competencies don't get directly addressed in the courses. They're addressed through the course learning objectives that are kind of a translation of these various competencies for the purposes of a specific course. And we need to make sure that we create those relationships between the course objectives and the competencies through this process called vertical alignment. There's also just so much stuff that needs to be tracked. There's hours, there's credits, there's ponderation, there's the achievement of the competencies, the achievement of the learning objectives. There is our course actually has to be, it's not just a single title, it has to be somewhat fleshed out. We need this course framework. The assessments matter. Sometimes the different labs matter. Sometimes certain lessons or activities need to be done within a particular course, and the program revision has to take those into account. Sometimes we don't just have competencies. Sometimes we have multiple sets of competency-like things. We have program outcomes. We have accreditation competencies. We have different topics that need to be tracked. All this to say, this got very, very complicated, and I was very out of my depth. Luckily, through our research practice partnership, we managed to sort through a lot of these and determine exactly what needed to be done and what kind of tool we had to build. So we started by asking, what are the key problems, the hard parts that people need in order to do a program revision? And the answers were tracking all the competencies, the program outcomes, and the goals, creating the competency matrix, designing the course learning objectives and making sure that they are what we call vertically aligned with the competencies, in order that, in other words, that the specific and general learning objectives created for the course actually correspond to the competencies in some way, and have some relationship between the two. And also creating the course framework. Again, these are, and I should go back here. These are the things that we learned through the research practice partnership. We aren't experts in any of these things, so we had to learn about how these things are done and what we could do to help support these things. Now, what actually makes these problems hard? So those were the hard problems. Why are they so hard? Well, they're hard because this is a highly interconnected system. It's spread across multiple files. Generally, basically, there's too much information connecting all of these different components that I talked about: the assessments, the competencies, the learning objectives, the courses, the program. All these things are connected in a very complicated way and all connected to each other. Visualizing stuff, because this is so complicated, visualizing stuff is so hard. It's very complicated. And because there's so many different files that things are often spread across, collaboration can be very difficult. And we need to keep track of all the different changes and versions. And I apologize if I'm going a little fast. I'm noticing the time here. So how do we, first off, how can we make these hard problems a little bit easier? So the interconnected data problem, the problem that there's just too many relationships between all this data to keep track of in something like, say, an Excel spreadsheet, we can tackle this through database programming. And in fact, I'm going to go through each of these on the next couple of slides, but the visualization of data, ideally, we want to be able to visualize our data in a whole bunch of different ways because there's too much of it to see all at once. So we want to be able to take our data and slice it in different ways and get different analytics on the components. There's a lot of stakeholders and many people working and trying to collaborate, our ped counselors, the teachers, everyone needs to be involved. So an online platform is very important. And the changes, we need to be able to make regular backups. And again, our database programming is going to come into play there. So this interconnected systems part. So this first way that we can make things easier. So first off, there was a lot of interconnected data. This is my first pass that I've saved this image because I like it, because as a part of our research practice partnership, I was trying to just determine the relationships between all these different things. Our programs, our courses, our competencies, the elements of competencies, the learning objectives, and the assessments. And we started sketching this out, and you can see this got really messy and really complicated really fast. There are a lot of relationships and links between these things at all levels. It gets very complicated. Spreadsheets and Word documents that are often used for program revision just can't capture this. And because these are so interconnected, when you make a change to any of these objects, it affects every single other object out there. So if you're spreading across Word documents and stuff, it's just, or Excel spreadsheets even, it can get really complicated. But databases can handle this stuff. So databases are really, really good at basically keeping track of all these relationships between our data points and updating everything all at once. So we knew that we wanted some database programming backend here. Now, visualizing the actual data, one of the great things about a database is once you have all these relationships between the objects, you can take those and you can go through and just and update in one place, and everything gets changed, and we can grab our data, we can grab that data and put it into a visualization and slice it any way we want and create a whole bunch of different visuals for the same chunk of data. And so that's what we've done. So this is the physiotherapy technology program, which is our standard for testing everything. Because the physiotherapy tech people at Dawson are doing their program revision, they've been very, very kind in letting us basically use them as our guinea pigs. So we've got all these different views that we can have of our data. We can have our drag and drop workflow data term by term, the different courses for the program. We've got these tables where we can have our competencies here and our various courses here, and we can see where the competencies show up in each course. We can do analytics here, where we take competency by competency and slice our data and say, where does this competency show up? What courses does it show up in? And what learning objectives for the course is this competency related to? Once all these things are in the database and all these links are created, it's just grabbing data and we can create whatever visualizations we want of it. Now, collaboration, well, we talked about creating this. So basically, half our problems are solved by creating a database The rest of them are going to be solved by creating this as an online platform. And our earliest versions of CourseFlow were not proper online platforms with their own server and save data and stuff and logins. These ones are indeed a proper online platform where we can publish things. We can, users have accounts. They can share their documents. They can give editing privilege on certain projects to other users of their choice. They can give view permissions to other users. They can give commenting permissions to other users. And as a side note, one of the interesting things for me from this research practice partnership was that, and this is just kind of an example of the things that come up by really having this kind of collaboration, is that I never thought to add a commenter only role. I had people who can edit, people who can view. But one of the widely requested features was like, hey, we want people to be able to comment. And the reason was the PED counselors wanted feedback from all of the instructors in the program that they were doing the revision of, but they didn't necessarily want those instructors to be able to actually edit the document. They didn't want the instructors to be able to move stuff around or change the competencies. Basically, they didn't really trust them messing around with stuff, but they did want them to be able to comment on things and give feedback because that instructional, that instructor perspective was very, very important to them. They really wanted the faculty to be as involved as possible in this. So we ended up creating a commenter role where we can, add comments and but not actually edit the project. And then last but not least, the versioning and change tracking. We made it so that it's easy to just take a project and you can just duplicate it and you've got your snapshot in time of, this is what the project looked like at this time. All your changes are tracked and you're going to be able to compare your different versions. Now, how do we actually, so this is how we made all those problems easier. So we took the hard parts of those problems and made them a little easier. What are our actual solutions here? What does it look like when we come up with a course framework or a competency matrix? A caveat, again, we have learned a lot about program design and revision. We're still learning. Nothing is one size fits all. So this might not look exactly the way you do it at your own cégep. But we are always open to feedback and research practice partnerships with other users. So if anyone wants to use this for their program revision and collaborate with us, we are happy to do so. So our first solution, tracking competencies, remember, was one of the first things that people have a lot of trouble with. So we made it so that you can quickly enter a whole list of competencies. We're also currently implementing quick ways to import these right from Excel spreadsheets. And then you can track them throughout the program with the table view. Again, this is the same as at the course level. You can drag and drop them onto the courses, and you can see this course, for example, has had these various competencies and elements of competencies added to it. Or we can just look at the table view and we can just see these as an entire table all at once. Second, creating a competency matrix. Well, once all this information is in there, we can just pull out all that info that's entered and create the competency matrix and either display it directly in CourseFlow, which we have an option for, or we can export it into an Excel spreadsheet to make it easier to share with faculty or anyone that needs to see it for accreditation purposes. And you can see here, we've even included all the, well, right now this program is only using the specific education hours, but the total hours and the ponderation, number of credits, everything can be tracked. Now the vertical alignment, creating these specific learning objectives, specific and general learning objectives for the course, and making sure that they're associated with the competencies, is probably one of the more finicky and tricky parts of program revision. And I don't think that all colleges do it exactly the same, but our solution was that we can take any given course, like this course here, Introduction to the Profession, and we can create its general and specific learning objectives. So this is a general learning objective divided into a bunch of specific learning objectives, and we can show which competencies are actually associated with that. And one of the things that this is used for, one of the things that this, like the final products that this shows up in, is actually the course frameworks. And course frameworks are something that is basically like a recap of each individual course. Our solution to course frameworks is you just use the course level and create a kind of wireframe version of your course. And so a trimmed down course, and then we can export that into an Excel spreadsheet that looks like the kind of, I think, slightly more standardized across CEGEP's course framework. And that looks a little bit like this. It's got the course title, it's got all of the competencies that get addressed here, and then it's got ponderation up here, the different course outcomes and sub-outcomes. So these are general and specific learning objectives, their associated competencies, and where they show up in lectures and activities, or labs, or learning activities, or assessments. And again, that can be exported directly to Excel. Now, I was going to go through a detailed example of this basically show you the current physiotherapy technology program on CourseFlow itself, but I think that we're going to have to settle for what I've just shown you, because we are pretty much done here, or we're almost out of time. And I think that I would rather go to a wrap up and questions, because what I was going to show you is pretty similar to what I've just shown you now anyways. So let's do wrap up and questions, if that's all right with you, Liz. So I guess our conclusion, wrap up, this is what we've got so far. This is our current version of CourseFlow. It is very much a living program. It is constantly changing. Because we're doing this research practice partnership that requires this tight cycle of feedback between researcher, developer actually as well, and practitioner, we try to do as many updates as quickly as possible. Things sometimes break a little bit, but we always get them fixed back up. And that way we're able to incorporate feedback as quickly as possible and continue this very tight network of the research practice partnership. Liz, if you want to add anything in conclusion, feel free. Otherwise, we can move on to questions.
Yeah, let's move on to questions. Gabrielle asks the question. I don't know the answer. The plan cadre de cours. I don't know.
Yes, I believe plan cadre de cours is is simply the French term for our course frameworks at the English CEGEPs, and yeah, the idea is to be able to export this framework into an Excel spreadsheet that's just going to have all of that information included directly in it, including even things like prerequisites and post-requisite courses. It's because, again, everything's just sitting in this database, and it can go and pull all that information in, dump it into an Excel spreadsheet. The spreadsheet's unformatted, but you could always add your own formatting, change it to look the way you like, and have that as your plan cadre de cours.
I guess what I'd like is, I mean, I wish that the webinar feature in Zoom would allow people to be able to turn their cameras on, and then we could all, I know, see you. I know it's not possible, but it would be great to get your feedback. So maybe by a show of, hands or whatever one does here. How many of you find this useful? Would it be good for your CEGEP? Would it be good for your programs? Or maybe ask the question, why did you choose to come today?
First, I would like to say to Elizabeth and Jeremy that I would like to thank you for this very lively, informative, and inspiring presentation. As I'm not an host, I cannot use the Q&A module to ask questions. So may I ask them verbally?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. What is the reception? The reception of the teacher by the use of CourseFlow. I imagine you had the feedback. Can you share them with us? And do you plan to make CourseFlow accessible in French?
Okay, so I can tackle that last one right now. Yes, CourseFlow will be accessible in French. I have translated everything. Okay. And I just did not actually run one of the files that was required to have the translations show up, okay. Unfortunately. But yes, you'll see the URLs have this /en/signup, and actually I'm no longer sharing my screen, so I will share that now because that has so this is the link to sign up. Okay. This is where you can actually, once you've signed up, it's easiest to just punch in this link to directly navigate. You see the /en, and if you change that to /fr, in theory, everything will be translated. There was a little file that I didn't run to turn the translations into actual machine readable ones, but in our next update, that will definitely be fixed.
Is CourseFlow used in Anglophone CEGEPs at Dawson, other colleges, or? Yeah,
so the reception, so I think that's related to your question about the reception we've gotten. The reception we've gotten is always quite positive across the board, and we are getting more and more people using CourseFlow, and you can actually see that by the number of people who publish their CourseFlow, their workflows on CourseFlow. So we've got a search function where you can search through user-generated content if they have chosen to openly publish it, and there's more and more of it out there. One of the issues that we're having a little bit with program revision, and I don't think Liz minds if I am open about this, but is that everyone's like, wow, this is great. I would love to use this for my program revision. There's one little thing that bothers me about it. Let me know when you have that fixed. And what we want to say is this is an ongoing process where we are always trying to adapt to what our users want and need, but we are not going to put all of the effort into creating the fixes for someone who is saying, yeah, we might use this later if you fix this thing. If someone starts to use it and is doing their program revision and says, hey, look, this is a big problem for me, but look, I've put in all this work into starting to use it, then we will prioritize it. So we are looking for people who are willing to jump in and use it. You don't have to do your whole program revision in this, but using it in whatever way works for you as part of the program revision. And then the feedback becomes so much more important to us because now we know that the person's actually using it. They know what they're talking about, and whatever we build for them is going to actually be used and useful.
Yeah, I just want to underscore what Jeremy is saying. It's because I guess most people are used to having Microsoft give them a tool, right? So you use the tool like the way Microsoft built it. And the fact that you hate parts of it, nobody's ever going to change it for you. We're not Microsoft. We are really working, and that's why we spent the time to set you up with that notion of what's our conceptual framework? You know, what is it that we're using? We're using this notion of partnership. And as a partner, we hope that we, as researchers, we're addressing, we're bringing the knowledge we have, but we're also willing and wanting your knowledge about what it is that doesn't work in from what we've anticipated. And we're building a tool together. We're not building a tool in isolation or not recognizing that things have to move forward. I'm not suggesting that Microsoft may not have had pilot users, and that's how they came up with, Outlook or whatever. But we're really building for the network. We're building for college teachers who are dealing with competencies and learning outcomes. And, we're building the tool with you, not for you. Perhaps is the biggest distinction. And so Jeremy's point of, we need, I know it, yes, you can wait until the tool is completed, but we don't anticipate the tool being completed. We anticipate the tool becoming better and, and evolving to your needs as you use it. So that's an important thing. One thing, Jeremy, I'm just thinking, maybe you can just show them, seeing that you got your screen, like what happens when you go click, sign up, and then what happens, what you see.
Sure.
Maybe that's something. And then there's some questions in the chat.
I actually want to cover this question because it's very important. Will it always remain free, or will there eventually be a fee? CourseFlow will always be free for users. Absolutely. Now, what we would like is for enough people to be using this that it becomes obvious to some of the SAGEPs or even the ministry that this is an important tool that they should give us some funding for. So we are always open to trying to get some money directly from the colleges or from the ministry, but CourseFlow will nonetheless always be free. And in fact, the whole thing is open source. So even if anything happened to our particular server of it, it's all open source, and anyone could spin up their own version of CourseFlow and run it themselves. I am very much having it open source is very important.
I see that there is a participant who asked this question, but it was addressed only to panelists and not to the participants.
Oh, okay.
The question is, have all the competencies for all of the programs already been input into the database, or is each user required to re-input the competencies each time they work on a program?
Okay, so the answer is no, not all the competencies for all the programs have been put into the database. However, more and more programs are starting to use are starting to use CourseFlow for their programs. Once they have their own, if they publish it, then you can always copy their program, duplicate it into your own projects, and then you would have all the competencies entered in as a starting point. So not all of them are in there, but it's becoming easier and easier. And again, we're adding a bulk import function that will allow you to quickly import from an Excel spreadsheet as well. Make things a little bit easier, because I know it looks like it would take a lot of time to enter in all of the competencies. It's not quite. If you're copy pasting, you can get up to a good pace, and it ends up taking maybe half an hour to get all of the competencies for a program.
Okay, it is 12:20. And it is Friday afternoon. So I would like to thank you again, Elizabeth and Jeremy, for your presentation. It was very, very interesting. As you can see in the chat, I'm not the only person who says that. And I hope having the pleasure to meet you in presence. So thanks again. It was very interesting. And thanks to the participants for your participation too.